I'm sort of worried about the future. Uh, in 2012, a whole bunch of stuff went down, Trayvon Martin and things like that. 2016, Trump comes into office. Plus the fact of how I grew up. I, was called Kenny Queer when I was a child. Um, I'm Jewish, so people would ask me where my horns are. Uh, Many of my friends and family happen to be black. And so I sometimes wonder if I have any kind of influence on the world and what I can do to change things. And so one of the things that I've noticed, because I'm an art historian, is that most art is oriented towards upper class white males. And there really isn't art made for other groups of people. Most art represents females, nudes, things like that. If you go through museums, especially contemporary art of the 20th century. And so one of the things that I try to do is I try to paint people who don't often get represented in art for people who don't get represented a lot in mainstream culture. So this painting is one of those examples of doing that. And one of the things that I think about is, does it really make a difference when you paint someone who doesn't often get represented? I was debating about this in my head. For example, on Facebook, a lot of people preach to the converted, and all of my friends are liberals, so everything we post is liberal, and we all are patting each other on the back in this self-congratulatory way. So I thought, well, I'm not going to do political posts on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. I'm going to actually try to represent people who don't get represented so that people will be able to buy those images for their homes. And the other thing that I try to do is I also contribute to the NAACP and the ACLU. So those are ways that I try to make a difference. So the subject matter of a lot of my art revolves around trying to give a voice or represent people who don't get represented, like this young man. And so I was thinking about, when I made this painting, what am I trying to say? What's the subject matter in the painting? So there are some things that are standard ideas. Well, first of all, I want it to be a beautiful painting, and I want it to be of a beautiful young man. And that kind of ties in a little bit with the idea of youth culture and someone being fit and having a beautiful body and form. But in this instance, he's young, male, black, and beautiful. And so the next question is, what is he doing? And I cropped it on purpose so that there were some things that made it feel a little ambiguous. For example, the arms and bottom of the body and the head are sort of touching or kissing or cropped off of the image, and that refers somewhat to this sort of pinwheel sort of a design that I've seen used a lot in especially classical artwork. For example, there's a pediment from Corfu in Greece that shows an image of the Medusa, and she is actually sort of a pinwheel kind of design, almost like a turbine wheel or something like that. One of my teachers described it as swastika-like, but obviously that has too much meaning to use that term for this. So the other thing about his form, and the title of it, is a Discobulusly Posed Young Man. And well, I was thinking of the Discobulus, the discus thrower from ancient Greece, more or less from the Golden Age in the 5th century or so. And one of the things that I was trying to do with it was show him as being a sort of beautiful classical ideal as well. And so his pose is somewhat based on those two classical sculptures, and also as a way of like bringing forward the meaning behind those things. So I'm representing him. Now, one of the other aspects of this is this guy running? Is he playing a game? What's going on in the image? And I wanted that to be a little bit more ambiguous because I wanted him to be active and powerful, almost like a young Greek god, but I also wanted there to be some sort of ambiguity so people could almost make up a meaning of what they thought was going on with him. Is he playing a game? So the formal aspects or the physical aspects of this painting are meant to also kind of provide physical pleasure and beauty to the image, but also to make you interested and be able to engage with it on a deeper level. So the composition is based somewhat on something called the rule of thirds, in which if you draw a grid where there's actually sort of 3 verticals and 3 horizontals running through the composition, you'll see that some of the more important elements visually end up on the corner third points of the image, and it's an old photographer's rule or trick to work with composition. The other thing that I wanted to do to make it visually interesting was also the idea of cropping the figure somewhat and having the edges kiss, which is also something that's actually new, more from the 20th century. Photographers often use that kind of thing. But there's also things formally about the paint and the paint quality. For example, the paint is applied really thickly. Like, one of the things I think about when I'm painting is I want to get as much paint on this panel as possible, as I possibly can. So I start with thin, washy layers, and then I start building up. And so when you look closely at the painting, you'll see that there's actually layers upon layers of paint on it. And sometimes I'll even apply the paint using plastering knives, and I pre-mix the colors so that I can get lots of paint, and I use thick bristle brushes to apply it. The background is really applied as thickly as the foreground, but the textures are different in the background. The brushwork is a little bit more broad, and you can actually see through that color yellow into these sort of underlayers of color beneath it. The brushwork on the figure itself is meant to flow with the contours of the anatomy and emphasize and sort of show the musculature and show the contours of the skin. And the last thing about my paintings, which is something that's kind of important for most people who are buying art, is that I actually make it on what's called a canvas panel that I get from Blick art materials. And the core of this is either masonite in some instances, which is a very medium density fiberboard, or acid-free cardboard, so it's not going to rot. In the past, canvas panels like this were not archival, that within 100 or 200 years they would start to disintegrate. And some canvas panels from the early 20th century are not doing very well, and restorers have a little bit of a hassle. But in this instance, these panels are meant to be archival and will last probably for 400 or 500 years or longer, depending on how well they're cared for. The other thing that I do is I try to work in standard sizes. So this is 12 by 16, and one of the things that is nice about working on panel with the 12 by 16 inches that I work with standard sizes. So I'm able to, if I have an exhibit or someone purchases one of these paintings, I can actually put them in an open back frame that I can get really cheaply on Amazon or Blick or even Etsy, or even go to a thrift store and find 12 by 16 frames and literally just take out the old art that's in those frames and just put it in there, and they usually have some sort of wires that fold over the back that will hold it in place. So for framing, this also makes it easy, and it makes it easy for shipping because it won't get damaged in the mail, and most of my work is sold directly to my collectors. So I hope that is kind of a nice explanation of one of the reasons why I paint some of the subjects that I do and how I paint. Thank you.